I'm here more in the capacity of my state hat that I wear, which is Executive Director of Families Advocating Intelligent Registries, which is the Maryland state affiliate of RSOL, and where I got my start in advocacy back in 2010, where we were actually 2009, where we were trying to stop the Adam Walsh Act. And I dove in head first, had never got darkened the door of my state legislature, had absolutely no idea what I was doing except for the fact that there had been a high-profile murder and bills were pouring in. And I'd been involved in the movement for about 2 months at that point. And I was on SOSN board at the time, if you don't know, I was support board at the time. And I was, when I saw that coming in, I put a notice up on the board and I said, help! I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can't sit and not do anything. And Lloyd, who you've seen a little bit floating around, I didn't know who he was on SOSN, of course, he said, I think I have somebody for you. He got me in touch with Larry Neely back in 2009. He's been my right arm ever since, and a lot of what you see today is coming from Larry, actually. I was a deer caught in the headlights that whole legislative session, but in spite of that, we didn't stop the Adam Walsh Act. It was hopeless. But we actually made it less onerous than it could have been otherwise. And we actually stopped residency restrictions, and they've never even tried to reintroduce that one in Maryland. So we did have some accomplishments that first year, in spite of the fact I had no idea what I was doing, and I was being remote controlled. So what you see today is from that, and then from later years, I've come to actually kind of enjoy doing the lobbying. Again, what you're going to get here is absolute basics. You've never talked to your legislator, you're uncomfortable with that, and or you just don't know what to do. So I'm here to tell you what we can do. This is taking those first steps. So let's see how this works here. There we go. So here's how we get started. If you've never darkened the door of your state legislator, it helps for you to remember just a few basic things. That whenever you get the most nervous about this, you just need to think for a minute that senators and delegates and representatives, or whoever it is that you need to talk to, got up this morning and had to put on their underwear just like you do. They have a family to deal with. They may be scrambling to make house payments because they're caring for an aging parent. They may have a passion for gardening, just like you. They're the same human beings as the rest of us. We tend to put them up on a pedestal and assume they've got a single side. And so we need to keep that in mind. They're smart in some areas, like this says, smart in some areas and very ignorant in others. And again, just like us, we don't know everything either. It's also very useful to remember, as you're thinking about talking to a legislator, that you have power. You have a vote. And that is a very powerful thing, especially when you're talking to your particular elected officials. They'll want to hear from you, and they also need to hear from you. And they need to know that you represent more than just yourself. So those are all very important things to know. And I often find, now it's not true in every state, but oftentimes I tell this to registrants at our meetings. You have power, you have a vote. And they go, what do you mean I have a vote? And invariably at these meetings, there'll be at least one person who doesn't realize that once they're off paper, in Maryland at least, they do have a vote, because they had no idea. It's been quite a few years now. I forget exactly. They didn't used to. There was a time when they didn't, but they've gotten it back. And they don't realize that. And, they'll say, oh, I'm heading down right now to go register, because they don't know. So even registrants do. Even in, and there's even a couple of states that you can vote even when you're in prison.
There's actually only 2 states right now that don't automatically
Yeah.
one is Virginia and the other.
Yeah, and some people wait, and I don't know all the details, but, and some it takes a little longer, you have to jump through more hoops, but, just about everybody eventually you can. Okay, given those things, you do want to tread a little carefully. You want to be sensitive to the fact that your elected officials do have to answer to their entire constituency, not just to you and your issue. Couple of examples, if they were elected by a predominantly conservative voter bloc who pushed hard for gun ownership, for instance, they're going to have to take that group very seriously and try to enact laws that'll make the gun toters happy. If their last race was an especially close race, they're going to be way more cautious about taking on a controversial cause. On the other hand, if a particular legislator that you're talking to has won by a landslide and they've been in office for 30 years, they're going to be probably more comfortable if you approach them asking for change, because they're not as worried about losing their seat. So those are all things that you can do a little homework on and find out about before you move on. Don't do like I did and dive in head first while the legislative session's in progress. Go ahead and do some homework. Get to know your state legislature's website. Every state has one. Read everything you can find that tells about your lawmaking process. Study that website and try to make sense out of it. If you've never been there before, that can be a challenge. It took me a couple of years before I can actually kind of get around to it. Yeah.
If you've got a smartphone, I highly recommend downloading Open States.
Open States is the
Wonderful
website,
app to have.
and that helps you locate the materials on your website. Thank you. Okay.
It's almost a condensed version of what the major
Okay.
website is. Yeah.
Yeah, and my main experience, again, I haven't been doing this all that long, is with my own website, they have information for citizens who want to make change. They'll tell you what the process is like. During legislative session, they'll have all the information about what bills are being heard, and it's a lot to absorb. But look it all over. Try to find all the information you can and jot down the questions that come up. Okay, God, I'm reading all this stuff and I still have no idea what I would do if. Write those questions down. Be sure you look for committees in each chamber. Which ones, and you might be able to figure it out with a little more research, which ones are likely to be hearing sex offender bills. That varies widely by state. In my state, that's oftentimes a judicial committee. They'll have different names, though. Sometimes something will pop up in health or some other, just depending on the situation. And learn how to search for the bills. You can often, if you're not during legislative session, you might be able to look at last year's and see where they were last year. So these are all things that you can do to get a sense. And look for keywords. The ones that I use most often are sexual offense, sex offender, obviously, and oftentimes even registry. Sometimes we'll pop things up. Because there's usually keywords that they use in your particular state. Another thing you can look for, of course, is your state's laws. If you're planning to be an advocate, you need to know what the laws currently are. We won't talk about that much today, because that's probably 201 rather than 101. They can be complicated, they can be hard to find, but you ought to find them, try to read through them, get a sense of what they are, because if you're going to be an advocate, somebody's going to call you and they're going to talk to you, you need to be able to know what they are and what's being changed, as a new bill comes out. You definitely need to take a field trip. One of Larry Neely's favorite jokes with me is, how can you be an advocate if you don't know where the front door of your state house is? So you definitely need to do that. And it's sad to say we do have some people that are advocates, they claim to be contacts for us, and they don't even know how to get in that front door. So definitely critical. Again, on that website, you'll find there's some organization, some part of the government, their sole purpose is to help citizens like you and like all those school kids, like you probably did in your home state when you were in 5th grade or whenever it was you had government, to help you get around the Capitol building, tell you all kinds of interesting things about the architecture and where the different chambers meet. Go sign up for that field trip. They love to do it. It's what they live for. It's like the reference librarians. That's what they like to do. So go and do that. Low pressure. Every year we have Fair Day at the Capitol in my organization, and so people will come. It's low key. There's oftentimes we do it real early in the session, and we might have people end up talking to their legislators if they happen to be free. But the main thing that we do is get them, A, now we know where to park. B, we know how to get there, which is a big deal in our area anyway. And then C, they know which building the Senate's in and which building the House is, and where the floor is, and we sit and watch a little floor session. And this is all just kind of a part of the tour. And so then it kind of takes some of that, oh my God, what am I doing aspect of it. So I do recommend doing that. And this is the time to ask those questions that you were jotting down as you were staring at the website. Ask those guys, and if they don't know, they will definitely know who to send you to. So go do an expedition, and an expotition, as Christopher Robin would say. One of the other things you can do on that field trip, stop in and say hello. You can stop by any legislator's office that your legislator or somebody else that you know of. They may or may not be there right then, but there'll be a staff person there. Stop in and just say, hi, I'm a brand new advocate and I don't have a clue, but here I am, and I'm going to be lobbying, or whatever term you want. I'm going to be here doing some advocacy in the future. What do I need to know? And they're happy to help you. The staff loves to help you. You don't even have to tell them what you're advocating for right at first if you don't want to. Just say, I'm going to be there. But they're often very interested to know that as well. And it gives you a chance to kind of practice what you might say to the lawmakers later on, because they'll say, they might say, oh, really, sex offenders? I didn't know. And who was it that said, I didn't know they had a lobby? So but it gives you a chance to sort of say that in kind of a low-key environment. And they can, again, help you. Okay, so now we're ready to start making contact with lawmakers themselves. Here's my suggestions for that. Your best method of contact is one-on-one. Ideally, it's one-on-one in person. That's not always practical. So in order of preference, again, an office visit, either in the Capitol or at their local office, wherever they might happen to be. They usually have two. Making a phone call is second best. Even arranging a time to make that phone call. Faxing, if they still have fax machines in your office, is good, because they're getting something physical. And then mailing is still better. Getting those individual letters. Email is becoming more well-known, but you have to know the legislator that you're sending it to, mainly because you don't know, is that person an electronic person or not. Some of them have really adopted it, and they've got Facebook pages, and by golly, they're out there, and they've got it all together. And the other ones are going, oh, my God, leave it with my staff. I'll get to it when I can. So you just don't know. But if you send a letter, if you send a fax, if you make that phone call, you're sure to get through to somebody. And so those are the preferred methods. Our preferred tends to be email, right? But it's actually not the best way to make sure you get a message. Here's something that you need to always be sure of. You need to have an ask. This is a common lobbying term. You don't want to ever go talk to a lawmaker without a clear action item. You're wasting their time if you do, and you're wasting your time if you do. Don't just show up there and want to tell your story. It doesn't have to be about a bill, because you may not be going there on a day when there's a bill being heard, but that's one possibility. It might be something as simple as just keep people like me in mind the next time a sex offender bill comes up. That's all I'm asking of you right now. But always have that ask. But there may be some bill, you may someday have a law, a new bill that you want to introduce, that kind of thing, and you want to have that ask. ready to go. They are all about action and moving forward. They want to do something for their constituents, so they want to know why you're there. And it should be something that they can do or choose to do or not to do. So you're asking them to do something. So make sure you have a clear ask, and we'll talk a little more about that. I did originally say a good lobbyist, but I want to point out that, I've been doing this for 3 years. I'm still not really a lobbyist. A genuine lobbyist is getting paid money by a particular constituency. And so technically, you're not really a lobbyist unless you're a professional at it. I will sometimes say I'm going to lobby because it's just a handy word. But technically, we're citizen advocates. We're a citizen of the state, and we're going to go advocate for a particular cause. Some things that you'd want to make sure as you're going in, you want to make sure you present yourself well. Make sure you're not looking scary and like if you're covered in tattoos and piercings and and you got your hair all spiked, that tends to be a little spooky to people, and they might be a little more uncomfortable. If you're a registrant, don't dress like you do when you go to get your mug shot. I hear stories about that a lot. It's like when I go to get my mug shot, I just deliberately look as horrible as I can because that's what they think I am anyway. And I said, don't do that when you lobby. Okay, definitely. If you're a good lobbyist, to be a good lobbyist, you want to try to make a point clearly, concisely. That's very important. You always want to understand that there are other viewpoints besides your own, and always, always, always be respectful and well prepared. There will be people that will argue this, that you should be confrontational, you should be out there and in their faces. But lobbying is not about being in someone's face. You can be pushy, you can be, you can sell. But to really be a good lobbyist, you've got to be ready to negotiate, and you've got to be ready to work with somebody. Remember back at the beginning I said these are the people to put their underwear on, same as you. This is your next door neighbor. You're going to go try and convince them that they need to change their minds on something. So you don't want to yell at them about that. So first things first, you've walked in there. And, of course, the first thing you do in the lawmaker's office, you want to make sure you remind them of who you are, especially if you're doing a cold call. If you've made an appointment, hopefully they'll remember that. What county you're from, what town you're from, what's your constituency? Are you there? Are you a potential voter for them in the next election? And right up front, you want to say what the purpose of your visit is, why you came. And pretty quickly on, you want to also mention that ask, that action item. You don't have to explain why yet, but you start with that because that sets the tone for your visit. What do you say now that you're in that room? I mentioned having a good ask and having a clear message. This is where we get into that kind of a detail. It's very important to really be concise. Don't go in there and expect to spend an hour explaining all the details of whatever it is that you're talking about. Especially during legislative session, you're lucky to have 5 minutes or 10 minutes. That's just all the time they have because they have so many other things going on. You might have a little longer if you get an appointment with a staff member. And a staff member, don't be disappointed because they have that lawmaker's ear. That's why they're their staff member. And so if for some reason you set it up for Senator Smith and Senator Smith turns out to have to be in a committee meeting, it's okay. That staff member is going to listen to you and is going to take notes. And if you've convinced that staff member that whatever you're saying is important, they will get that to the representative. And they are, those staff members run the place. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So you want to keep it really close and to the point. You want to have, again, these bullet points. Okay. So take the time up front to write down exactly what you want to say. Let's say there's a bill. Most of us are trying to stop some bad legislation. That's just where we're at. So don't go in there and just say, this bill is stupid. Try to take a little time. Okay, why is it stupid? What reason can you put to that? And have a couple of key points. Take a little time to write that down. And when you go in there, talk to that lawmaker and say, look, these residency restrictions they're not a good idea. They don't work if a person's going to, so you go through, and we've all heard the stories, so I don't need to add them to you, but you have those written down. I especially need that kind of a thing because I don't extemporaneize well. I said it right that time. I don't speak extemporaneously very well. I need to have those talking points because I will go in and totally forget why I'm there. Just instantly. So it helps me to have those bullet points because then I can stay on topic and stay quick. And again, be very polite and professional and try to anticipate as you're writing these things down, what questions might they have? And again, this is where if you've done your homework with the legislator and you know they're coming from a really conservative district and they're likely to be really more supportive of victims than of sex offenders, what kind of questions would they be asking in that context, and can you address those? You'll never get them all, but you can try. So try to have that ahead of time. But again, don't expect to have a whole lot of time. And again, when you go in there, remember it's a big picture. They've got to balance wishes and needs of all different constituents. And so, as you were mentioning with the story, right, that it's okay to mention a little bit about your story, and we'll get to that in a second, but it's really more important to stick to a bill, to the Constitution, to an issue, and to stress that that you are representative of many other people in your community, in your state. That's a much more powerful point than if you go in there and say, I had this conviction back in 1982 and the law has really screwed me over and my life is miserable. They don't have an ask out of that. They have nothing that they can do about that. So that's why it's key. Try to stick to the legislation. It may be true, but it's just not going to get you anywhere. Okay. Questions that come up. Personal questions are going to get asked. It's the $1 million question, and it happens almost every time, whether you're a registrant, whether you're somebody like me. You need to have an elevator answer. 30 seconds. And the question is generally, so what got you involved in this issue? That's my question usually. So what got you involved in this issue? If you're a guy, they're more likely to assume you're a sex offender, number one. Or you might have said something about being a registrant and it's affecting you personally, in which case you can pretty much guarantee somebody, especially if there's more than one person, will say, so what did you do? Yeah, what was your crime? They'll say it somehow or other. They might be polite and they might be genuine and supportive, but they're going to ask that question because they just can't help themselves. They're human beings and they're curious. You do not have to answer that question. Okay, and I stress this with my folks all the time. My pat answer to the what got you involved is, and this is how long it takes me, I have a family member who's still serving time for a sex offense, and I promised him that I was going to do all I could to make sure he had a life when he got out. I'm done. Okay? That's my answer. The first time I asked the question, it took me about 5 minutes. Okay? But that's enough. They get that I have a family member, and I'm done. What I tell people who are, and I shift back to the message I'm delivering, if you're a registrant, I really encourage you at the absolute most that all you say regarding what you, quote, did is to name that you had an X degree conviction and so a year, and then immediately get back onto the topic. But what I actually recommend is even best is, with all due respect, my conviction isn't really the issue right here. We're discussing some problems with the bill, or we're concerned about constitutional rights, and just move it right on back to that. Especially, certainly something like, yeah, it's not who I am right now, it's who I was, is what she's saying. And you could certainly include, if you're going to mention that you had a conviction, you can certainly mention, I had that conviction back then. I've done my time for it. I'm sorry. And you don't even have to tell them that you're sorry because actually you shouldn't have taken that plea because you're really innocent. I mean, you just don't go there, okay? I mean, it's just better to just, again, with all due respect, the conviction isn't the issue. I'm here to talk about the Constitution. I'm here to talk about whatever it is, and just move right on back in there. If you feel like you've got time and you feel like they're sympathetic, they're a friend of the family, whatever it is, and you really do, I still only suggest doing this if it's extremely sympathetic. As I mentioned up here, extremely sympathetic is like Romeo and Juliet. Porn doesn't count. It really doesn't. People think, oh, it's only a non-contact offense. I'm telling you, John and Jane Doe, it's just as bad as if you touched them. So again, you're just really better off not going there if you're going to be lobbying. It's a distraction to what it is that you are there for. The lawmaker cannot help you with your personal problems. I have a lot of people that get confused about that. Maybe they're thinking about governor pardons, but this is a different branch of the government. Lawmakers make laws. The only way they can help you is by changing a law or adding a law. So to go in there and say, you know, that the justice system messed me over isn't going, I mean, they can't do anything about that. They're not on the justice system side. They're on making laws, not enforcing the laws. So they just can't help you. And they'll tell you that, and then you will have wasted your time. So I'm telling you now, here's some things you don't do, okay? Don't threaten not to vote for them. Doesn't do any good. Getting overly emotional. Now, some of us, females especially, can't always help that. Even if we're not telling our personal stories, and those tears just pop out. But we do try to, you know, keep it professional as much as we can. On the other hand, getting too impersonal can also be a problem. If all you do is go in there and hand them a bunch of statistics, that's not going to help either. You want to go in there, again, with a very clear ask and a clear message. Being confrontational and argumentative, as I mentioned earlier. I generally find that turns them off and you're out of the room a whole lot quicker. And you don't get a chance to change minds that way. And being long-winded. You know, I mentioned earlier on, you want to respect that lawmaker's time. It's rare that you get a whole lot of time. Now, this can vary from state to state. You got a small state with a small state legislator and legislature or year-round, you know, so it'll vary. But assume that they don't have a whole lot of time, and if you get more, it's a gift. You know, so try to stay real close to the point. So here's a few things as you're wrapping up your 5 or 10 minutes or however long you've managed to get. If your organization has a relevant brochure or position statement, like the Leo brochure that we have downstairs, you're welcome to leave that behind. You also want to have a clean copy of those bullet points that you put together to leave behind. Make sure they have your contact info. It can be on the talking points or a separate business card or whatever you've got. And then, of course, always thank them for the time that they've given you. Even if they, you know, kind of snubbed you and didn't give you the answers you wanted, you thank them for their time. They did give you the time, after all. So, quick touching on some other different ways of reaching out. Obviously, I've been focusing on you show up at the door. A lot of these kind of things would apply to a phone call. Again, when you make a phone call, you keep those same talking points handy, keep your ask handy. Especially during a session, if you're calling about a bill and you actually get through them, you're definitely not going to have real long on the phone. You may only have time on the phone to give your name, your address, the bill number, and whether you're for or against it. But those things are still critical. So I do push my members to make calls like that. I say, you know, just you know, even if all you do is call up and say, "Hi, I'm Susan Smith from such and so county, and I'm calling about bill number 550, and I'm against it," and they will jot that down, and that will kind of be like an informal vote. So they're hearing from people, and they're saying, "Oh, this many people are calling in and not liking it. This many people are calling in and they're liking it." It does count. And if you got an extra minute, they might say, "Well, now why is that, Miss Smith?" And then you might have a minute or two to hit a bullet point. My first year of doing that, some of my phone calls were mighty interesting. I remember the first time I called one of the main judicial offices just to say, you know, I'm Brenda Jones, I'm with FAIR, and I'm really against House Bill 936, the Adam Walsh Act. And they said, "Wait a minute." I said, "Now I'm calling about the Adam Walsh Act Bill 936. And they said, "Oh, yes, that's a terrible bill. That's a great bill. Don't worry." And I said, No, wait, excuse me. I'm against that bill." Long pause. "You're against the bill?" And it's, yes, ma'am. And then I got to explain. And that was the first year, again, that we were there. And then now they're used to us and they know we're going to be against it. But that first year, they were very surprised because they were getting tons and tons of calls of people saying, we need to get tough, we need to get tough, we need to get tough. So having those calls was definitely a help. Yeah, we kind of ran through that already. Writing letters. This is basically, again, your bullet points. Have your name and your address and the bill number, title number if you're doing legislative work. Just keep it to a handful of points. You don't want to write a big long-term paper. They don't have time to read it any more than they have time to listen to you for half an hour. Do make it personal and unique. If you're a member of a group and somebody gives you a form letter, that's great because you'll have your talking points in it, but you want to personalize that letter. You know, don't just like, you know, make a copy and sign your name at the bottom. You want to turn it into your letter, and because it has way more impact that way. And again, use email only if you already know the legislator and you know that they're reading that email. But I'll hit a little bit on the legislative process just so you're familiar with it. Our focus here is mainly on contacting legislators, but it helps to know a little bit about that. So this is going to be hard to read. But the legislative process, the most important thing that, and this is true in most, I've tried to keep this really generic, every state's a little different. In fact, if you were in Nebraska, this would be totally wrong because they have a unicameral legislature. They only have a Senate. I don't know if that's true in any other state in the union, but I know it's true in Nebraska. So yeah, so they've got it easy. They just got one set of things. But this is the absolute simplest version of what happens. The top section says that a bill is drafted. You know, so somebody says, I want this kind of a law. It gets introduced, and I'm going to walk away from the microphone, sorry. But it gets introduced to one of the two chambers, to the House or to the Senate. Most have two chambers. It's going to move from that down to, and there they just sort of read it on the floor and they say, okay, we've got it, and here's the committees it's going to, and then it gets assigned to committees. In Maryland, it tends to be assigned to only one, sometimes to two. Other states, it can be automatically assigned to as many as 3 or 4. It just depends on what their process is. So it gets assigned to the committees to be heard one at a time. The committees are your key. So while it's in a committee is when you can do the most work. You'll first find out about it when it's introduced. If you're watching your website, that's what you're going to look for during your legislative session, is that you know, a bill has been introduced and it has to do with, you know, residency restrictions. I'll just stick with that. And so then you watch for it. When is it going to get scheduled in these committees? The committees are where the dirty work goes. That's where the decision making really happens. The committees it's assigned to a particular committee based on the subject matter. That's why it tends to be judiciary, because somebody's broken a law and now they're, you know, dealing with things. So, but there might be a budget component, so you might have a separate budget committee. You know, again, it depends on who you are. That's where you want to focus during a legislative session, is to know which committees it's assigned to and talk to people in those committees. So that's where you do your homework. They're gonna review it amongst themselves. There will be a public hearing that'll be there at some point, and that's the opportunity for you and for anybody else, if you have an organization that could come and testify about a bill using those same bullet points or pieces of the bullet point, and then eventually they will vote. In my state, they tend to vote at a totally different time than when they have the hearings. Others, they do it immediately after the hearing. They'll vote it up, they'll vote it down, they'll vote it and make some changes, and then they'll send it on to the next committee, or they'll send it back out to the full floor, and they'll say, we recommend that this pass, we recommend that it fail, we recommend that it passes with these changes. So again, I'm really super simplifying, but that's basically the process. Once it's done going to that one, goes back up, starts down the other side. And this is assuming you've got one committee it's dealing with. Of course, if you're dealing with multiple committees, you're going to drop a whole bunch more in there that it has to get through before it even gets to the other side. Now, the way some states will do, what you'll find a lot of times, is that you'll get people that'll kind of work together, and they'll drop in companion bills. It might be called something different where you are. So the Senate, somebody in the Senate will drop in a bill, and there'll be somebody in the House that'll drop in the identical bill. It's called cross-filing. So then you'll start seeing the same bill kind of moving through on both sides. They still have to both go down, cross, start again. But what happens is, since they're cross-filed and they started the same, at some point they'll end up, if it passes, they'll end up with something that both sides has passed. Then they don't match. They go to some kind of a joint committee gets formed. That committee tries to work out the details so that it is exactly the same, because before it can get passed fully, it has to match. Both sides have to agree on exactly what the language is. So you can see this could be, even with my simple version, this can be a long, tedious process. This is why we have a lot more success killing bills than, because it's also hard to get one introduced. It's hard to get one through all of those things. Most bills don't pass. And so it's much easier to kill one, because if you've got a committee chair, for instance, that's on your side, and depending on how we have a committee chair on our side in the judiciary, and I can go and talk to that committee chair, and doesn't always work, but I can go and talk to him, and I can say, look, this is a really horrible piece of legislation. We've got issues with this and that, or if you could just tweak this bill such and such a way. That committee chair can just decide never to call it up for a vote. It never gets out of committee. Or they can just stall it for a while so it gets too late, and then the committee, it doesn't have time to move through the other chambers. It's dead. So those are things that you can do that, even if you don't have the super legal smarts to really push something through, you can kill something much more easily. So that's just a quick summary. Eventually, if something does pass, it's gotten through committee, eventually it gets signed by the governor, you got a new law. So there's really quick nutshell of how the legislative process works. So just mentioning, committees, each one, again, I mentioned they have a certain focus. They meet during legislative sessions. I'm going to skip through some of these a little bit. Your legislators, these are the people we're talking to. Again, this will vary a little from state to state. Most legislators get assigned to typically a particular committee is kind of their main focus. That if they're an attorney, they tend to end up in justice or whatever their interest is. But they'll also be on other subcommittees and other special interest groups, and as they go along, it helps to get to know who's on the committee hearing your bill, who's your friend, who's your enemy. You can tell that by seeing how they vote on the committees that they're on. You want to get to know them and start courting them. And developing those relationships takes time, much time. You're not going to walk in that first year and have anybody immediately trust you. Some things that also help you with legislators, I think I mentioned this one earlier on. If you're a constituent, that's a big help, because most will give you more attention. If you are their own constituent, you're going to vote for them or against them. If they're on a committee hearing the bill, that's especially critical that if they're yours. I have one of my legislators. He never votes the way I want, but when I show up in that room, I go, "Hi," So it's good to foster that relationship. Even if they're not on the committee, you can still stress that when it comes up for a floor vote. But you really want to focus on those committees. I've oftentimes tried to talk to my legislator, and he says, "Well, I'm over in the Ways and Means Committee, and I just I can't do anything with this bill because it's over in Judiciary." You can tell them, you want them to know, and it might be you can say, "Hey, could you go talk to your friends over there in Judiciary and just encourage them that you've got this constituent?" But they don't have the same power. If you're not a constituent, that's okay. You're still a concerned citizen of the state, and you would just stress that. And again, focus on the key committee members. If you do have an organization, that also helps. It definitely helps, I've found in my state anyway, if you are a part of a citizens group of some sort, to be able to say, "I'm Brenda Jones with Families Advocating Intelligent Registries," and they say, "What?" And I say, "Yeah, that's a mouthful. It means fair," and that's fair for short. And because they like to know, and that also because it lets you know that you're representing more. That being said, Please only do that if you have the permission of the organization. Don't go in there just because you happen to be a member of the organization and speak on their behalf, because you have no idea what the higher-ups are doing that might be behind the scenes. They may be carefully crafting some kind of a special deal with this person, that person. They've got their message they're working on. And if you go in there, maybe they're trying, and you go in there and you say, well, I think the registry's okay about such and so, and I'm a member of FAIR. They'll come back and they'll say, wait a minute, you had somebody in here just the other day that was telling me they thought the registry was okay, but now you're telling me, and it can just scuttle any work that's being done. So you don't want to do that unless you have the clear message right from that organization. You won't know. And a confused message can scuttle it for everybody. Don't show up there in cut-off jeans and a T-shirt, okay? Or again, with your, with your tongue spouting things and stuff. Suit and tie, business suit, you want to look sharp, okay? They'll treat you better. So this is just about, I'll hand out just text that deals with this. Here's one thing I will mention if you show up for testimony. Remember, you're going to hear testimony from both sides. Show mutual respect. They got their opinion just like you do. Don't be offended. This often people don't understand about committees. Don't be offended if committee members walk in and out right in the middle of your presentation. Okay? Don't take that personally. They've got 3 other committees they're doing. They may be introducing a bill. Somebody may have made an appointment. You have no idea what they're doing. They've got staff members, most of them, sitting back listening to this and taking notes. So even if they're not there, they'll get your message, or at least the overall thing. So don't freak out about that. That's another good point, right? And this also varies widely by state. In my state, if it's on there, it will get heard. It's like almost unheard of to have something put off. Meanwhile, Larry Neely's state, and it sounds like yours as well, they might put a whole mess of things on the agenda and say it's going to happen on Thursday the 15th, but then you get there and there's just a lot of testimony on some other bill or whatever, and then they say, well, sorry, we're out of time, come back on such and such date. I would hate living there. Larry, on the other hand, doesn't want to live in my state because he doesn't like the fact that we don't vote the same day. So, it comes and goes. But yeah, so different states. With mine, I might show up, most of ours start in the afternoon. I might show up at 1 o'clock, and it might be 7 or 8 o'clock at night before they call my bill. Most of the time, it's not that bad. But, if there's some really, I had to wait one day because they were legalizing pot. Okay, you can imagine there were 100 people that all wanted to testify on that bill, and I had to sit through that because they wanted to clear that 100 people out before they got to any other bills. I've had a couple of those, and you just got to sit and you got to wait. But at least I knew they would eventually get to me. They would be exhausted. They would be tired. They might not want to listen to me anymore. Right. Yeah, right. Bring a little something to do in the meantime. So you do have to learn your particular state's way of handling. That's one of those things you can ask the staff members in the committee. Yeah, we do that as well. In ours, we do that as well. We sign up ahead of time to say, in fact, what they just started in my state this year, they could write down, you go in and you sign up that I'm Brenda Jones, an organization, if you have one, are you for or against it, and are you planning to testify? So you can go up, then that way they've at least logged in, you've shown up, and you have an opinion, and then you don't necessarily have to stand up and give your opinion. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I actually have a 2-part question. First is, have you ever gone into a legislator and had them say something like, well, a lot of my constituents wouldn't like this, and if so, how do you handle it? And my second part is, did I understand that pot is legal in Maryland?
They did pass a little tiny something, I think, about medical marijuana. I confess I can't remember what they did, but no, they didn't legalize it in marijuana. They tried, but they didn't. Yes, you can go in and talk to a legislator, and I find this frequently to be true. The one-on-one conversations in private, I find a lot of lawmakers are actually fairly sympathetic, and they will get the drift. But they'll say, Brenda, it's wrong. But the last time I tried to raise my hand and say something about that on the floor or in the committee, you would have thought I was advocating raping babies. They crucified me in the last. I almost lost the election. So that's the other thing you have to be really sensitive to, is that, you can have a lawmaker on your side, but oftentimes the way you know is that they're not talking. On the other hand, you're not going to go in there. I had, when they passed the Adam Walsh Act, there was one person who abstained. She said, I didn't have the balls to vote no. Everybody else, whether they agreed or didn't agree, they did not dare vote any other way. So you can't use votes in this particular cause very well. I usually can tell my friends by the ones that aren't up there grandstanding. And that's how you know your friends, and you end up working behind the scenes. That's why it's so important not to go in there huffing and puffing, because you know that they're on your side because they haven't been out there trying to get tough. And I have had an instance where, for instance, one lady I wanted to speak to about a bill. They were advocating for, they were wanting to put GPS units on everybody in Tier 3. Perhaps not realizing that we now have 80% of our registrants on Tier 3 since they passed the Adam Walsh Act. And how many people were in Tier 3. And I said, do you realize that some of the people you're wanting to put those GPS units on are the ones who, were 20 years old and had a 16-year-old girlfriend, because that's included? Absolutely not. Couldn't possibly be. And I said, all due respect. Well, but they, no, it's just, that's just ridiculous. And then you find out I was offended against, and they never changed, and you're not going to win that. You're not going to win that. All you can do is it will say, thank you very much for your time. And just check out that, it's true what I said. You can check it out online. Here's the statute number. Thank you for your time. Bye. Because you're not going to win that. As soon as you find out somebody was a victim as a child, you tend to lose that. Sometimes having a bunch of people there is probably not helpful, but on a bill where having people there, I do try to put talking points out, find out who's coming. When they were trying to do Halloween restrictions especially, I said, here's the talking points. I need you to come out and tell if that's going to impact your family. So here's some talking points. Come out, let me know you're coming out. And sometimes I'll even say, send me your testimony, let's check it, and we can make sure we're not all saying the same thing. It's definitely true that the going and testifying, she's more organized than I am, I think, at this point. What we've done at most is that we do check to make sure that we're, not repeating ourselves, that sort of thing. But I do also encourage members oftentimes to just show up. Because the other thing that's very powerful, you may have somebody that's terrified of public speaking, or maybe they don't even speak well. But I say show up and support the other folks. And when one of us is standing up and saying this bill is bad for X reason, and I have all these people back here in support, stand up, guys. And that is powerful. And I've seen that work in other situations. So definitely powerful. Yeah, website. I know our website has the same thing where you can actually sign up. On ours, they'll sign up for notices of any changes about bills. That's what we have on ours. So you would look for a bill that you're interested in, and then there's a way you can sign up. And so then anytime there's a change, which could be, it's been scheduled for a hearing, or it's had a vote, or, whatever, then you hear about that. And those are all things that you learn as you do online. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Yes.
Thing Mary Sue has us do after we've gone in for a bill that we're supporting or opposing is once we've done our testimony and submitted our information and the bill's been heard and or killed, we all get up at the same time and leave because it's a visual from the committee.
Yeah, that's great.
And then a lot of the rest of us will follow up with letters.
Right,
Thank you,
right.
the offices we've been in,
Follow
talked
up.
to them.
That's a good one. I didn't include that. Yes.
Is send them a letter thanking them for their time.
Yeah.
Again, and telling them why we were there briefly.
Yes, thank you. That's a really good addition. I need to make sure to add that to my presentation for the next time. Follow up, especially with a visit, is really important to do if you can. With a little thank you letter saying thank you for your time. During legislative session, which is often when I'm doing it. There may not always be time for that, but definitely if you're arranging some other time when you want to have that conversation, it's worth it. Carla?
A while ago about kind of like behind the scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes.
Even when the session is going on, you've got those bills you know, it may be on the agenda, like for Arkansas, but it may not show up that day. And so I have been known to go up there and talk to them, doing that 15-minute elevator, you know, as you're walking down the hallway with them. So a lot of it even takes place behind the scenes, you know, to be able to talk to
Yes.
one or two of them.
Yeah, I've had better luck sometimes with especially the chair of the Judiciary Committee. I'll often have better luck grabbing him as he's heading over to, you know, from one place to another. Extremely powerful guy, and, you know, everybody's courting him. So I felt really lucky one day. His aide came out and said, well, he's just about to walk over there. Why don't you just catch him? I said, yeah, okay. So I walked along, and he said, so tell me what you need to know. And he's used to this. Everybody does it, right? So I'm going along with my little bullet points as we're walking along and say, well, you know, I have a problem with this bill, and here's why. Okay, good. I'm glad you're here. And then I tell him the other one. He's on our side. So, you know, so I said, and then we're concerned about this other issue, and, you know, so it's this bill. And he said, now, what's that bill? And he flags it in his mind, you know, as we're walking along. So they do it to each other as well. Yep. Yeah, on those last few days of session, especially, sometimes those committees meet as they're walking, from one place to another. So and it's kind of hard for you to be there on those occasions. For the record, yeah, just to repeat the emphasis here again, I mentioned the importance of the staff. And that's where it's really key. And then, you know, particular legislators to make that relationship with somebody in those offices, because they're the ones that are going to get you past the door, and they're going to get you to those legislators. And even if you don't have a chance to talk to that particular legislator, they might get that back to you. So, you know, build those relationships, take that time. It's going to take, if you're just getting started, it's going to take a little while. There's a lot more that I need to do. You guys are light years ahead, because I'm already hearing several of you, you know, doing things, and I've got just one or two or three that'll show up on occasion, you know. But yeah, and you too. Carla's up here with me too. So yeah, definitely. But it's important to build those relationships. Right, and this is the thing that you can also tell people, especially if you're going in trying to promote some piece of legislation. You say, look, we know it's tough. Larry Neely, probably he has the better story. I mean, they were able to pass a bill that stopped local residency restrictions. It did a lot of really good things, and this is where Larry's strategy came into play. I could never do anything like that. He's been a legislative person, you know, way before this cause, so he has relations out the wazoo. But you know, he was able to go in there and present it as the opposition. Their organization did not support the bill. This is how undercover it was. So they presented it as, we're getting tough on sex offenders. Look at these things we're doing. They get us closer to the Adam Walsh Act. Okay, so the person who sponsored the bill was able to stand up there and kind of play the get tough card, even though behind the scenes they had slipped a bunch of stuff in there that was actually going to make things better. Okay, so that's how sneaky you have to be sometimes with this issue. And so it's a real challenge. I'm going to try to go into it. I know our time's, I think, about up here, right? So, but yeah, very important.
Yeah, because on that place of employment, we had business leaders go up and testify. Very significant.
Yeah, but it's a risk. And so, you know, you definitely let those people know that.